Hello and welcome to the road to the G20, where we look at developments leading up to the summit in November. We've been looking at the progress of the various working groups who have been discussing issues affecting their countries. So let's take a look at latest developments involving some of the G20 working groups. Our Energy Minister, Hwindingwi hosted a second meeting of energy ministers in Cape Town. He told delegates that it's essential to balance the needs of the local environment with that of the economy. He says there needs to be a focus on growth and employment, and livelihoods need to be protected.
The point to be made, I think globally there's a deep liquidity. There's money that is available, significant amount. And of course they are sitting in the industrialized global north. So they're not sitting with a money problem. And then we know that we've got the endowments on the continent to help this transition, our own transition and development. The transformational aspects of this transition is important, and it can also support the ambitions of the global north to meet their ambitions and their obligations as articulated in their nationally determined contributions. Of course, those are voluntary targets, but once you put it out there, then it becomes your own obligations because at your own accord you have committed to that agenda. So it's about pulling all of these things together. And the terms should not be punitive. It should not be extractive in the manner that it should not seek to disadvantage developing countries. We just don't have the balance sheet to support this, but we've got the endowments to be able to, if you like, our skin in the game, make sure that everyone benefits from this exercise.
Well, the Minister also says that nuclear power is definitely one way to address South Africa's power needs. And Acting Electricity and Energy Director General Foster-Pedley agreed that there is money there. He says most countries are able to access finance to change their electricity strategies, and arrangements can be made for countries who are battling.
Look, I think the nature of the challenge requires us not to be exclusive. So we have to broaden the scope of the opportunity that is before us. The G20 by itself constitutes 85% of GDP. It's almost 75% of global trade. So embedded within the G20 is a significant funding capability, technology capability, and that needs to be exploited. But certainly, I don't think there's any intention to close out to other jurisdictions who could come in and contribute to that, to the ultimate objective of ensuring energy security at the same time addressing our climate action goals.
On another note, the Reserve Bank launched the Tech Sprint under the G20 banner. It deals with making sure that the G20 countries have the latest technology to strengthen their cross-border payment systems. Lyle Horsley, who is the head of FinTech at the Reserve Bank, says AI and other challenges need to be considered.
So the G20 Tech Sprint is a really innovative way for regulators and central banks to get closer to innovation and see emerging technologies, right? And so it's a time-bound event that allows us to practically explore new technologies to help us address some of the challenges that we are facing from a policy perspective. The challenges that we've specifically identified for this G20 Tech Sprint relates to digital identity solutions, consumer-consented data sharing arrangements, and then mitigating fraud and cyber risks in fast payment systems. So from the solutions, we are looking to see how do innovators think about using technology to solve for these problems that we are facing in these areas, and really looking at innovators from across the world, but also really keen to see innovations from Africa and South Africa more specifically.
So those are some of the big stories making G20 news, but one of the big themes under discussion is how to create jobs and boost local economies. As you heard, AI is growing and government is shifting its attention to a green economy, and there are concerns that the focus is not on our jobs but rather the economy. Well, joining us to discuss this is the Dean of the Henley Business School, Jon Foster-Pedley, and CEO of Tribe Africa, Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. Jon Foster-Pedley, good to have you with us today.
Thanks, Ray. Glad to be here, of course.
Rutendo, good to have you with us as well.
An absolute pleasure, Ray. Thank you for having me on your show.
I'm going to start with you. We're talking about the G20. You work with Africa Tribe. Is Africa being left out here?
No, I think if anything, Africa has been very involved. And first and foremost, the fact that the G20 is happening on African soil that in itself is an imperative reflection in terms of the importance of G20 to Africa, and an opportunity for African countries and leaders, both in the private and the public sector, to actually galvanize together with regards to harnessing this opportunity. Albeit we've got our geopolitics and our geoeconomics that are quite turbulent at this point in time, but it's an opportune time for Africa, for both the private and public sector leadership to capitalize on this opportunity.
All right, so Jon Foster-Pedley, leading on from what Dr. Rutendo just said there, are we looking at, that's great, Africa's here, it's in South Africa, fantastic. Are we making the most of this opportunity, or is it just a lot of hot air?
Well, it could be either, couldn't it, Ray? So it's up to us. So if it were to be hot air, we would sit around a table, make plausible and kind comments, and we wouldn't deal with the real issues of poverty, exclusion, of just transition, and all the other things that are really on our mind. You know, the three themes of sort of solidarity, equality, and sustainable development are really important in South Africa. We're not here in South Africa hosting the G20 just for ourselves. We're here for Africa. You know, for 1.4 billion people, we have to represent them, and we have to be a voice for them. So this is a golden opportunity for us in South Africa to speak for Africa on the global stage with confidence, and not to back off and just be asking for permission to do what we need to do. We need a certain confidence now, and South Africa needs to channel that in the G20 and make a difference.
All right, Rutendo, channel that energy, make a difference. I mean, where are we with this at the moment? The lights keep going out. Our unemployment rate in South Africa, 32.9%. That's the official amount, never mind the unofficial amount. Again, is this another talk shop, or are we going to try and fix this with the G20?
I think when you have the coming together for an event like the G20, there's always risk of a talk shop. But at the end of the day, if you look at the people who have been represented, I mean, the first thing and foremost from a South African perspective, you've got a lot of the captains of industry being involved in the G20 or the B20 task force, which obviously feeds into the G20. The purpose of the G20 is to formulate policy and agree on policy. So that in itself already lays a foundation for practical road plan to be put in place to actually achieve key objectives. So I agree totally with Jon. You know, one of the problems Africa is facing, it comes from energy. We've had the 300 conference that happened in Tanzania. It comes to food in terms of distribution, and a lot of that is happening, and Rwanda has got some key initiatives happening. But I think the opportunity here is to have some practical blueprint that can actually be implemented to change things for the African continent, and thus the responsibility, and I think I'll end with this, the responsibilities for the African leaders, both the private and the public sector, to carve for themselves this opportunity to bring change, leveraging off G20, and that for me is the biggest opportunity there.
I like that, a blueprint, Jon, a blueprint. What a great idea. But I mean, you, Dean of the Henley Business School, you deal with entrepreneurship. Is that the only way to go? Every time we have a problem, government says, private sector, you're it, tag, you're it. Is that the only way to go?
You need a good government to create the conditions for business across Africa. You need good governance as well to make sure the institutions are managing properly and fairly, not just supporting democracy, but also creating a context where business can grow. When you've got corruption, when you've got inequities, when you've got significant poverty, that can't work. So what we need to do is drive the agenda of education. Of course I will, as Dean of a Business School, I would say that. We need to drive the agenda of education. But that is based on a confidence in people in Africa. We need a confidence in ourselves that we are able indeed to go onto the global markets, to be competitive, and we need to stand together to do that. 54 countries, very complex. How do we have a voice for Africa? This is an opportunity. South Africa can be like a bridge between the developed economies of the G20, some southern, some northern, and also the rest of the countries in Africa. So this is our chance for a bit of statesmanship, and also to make statements as well, that people listen and hear. Now's our chance to put South Africa and Africa on the map. Let's not blow it.
Right, let's not blow it. The United States may not agree with you, Jon Rutendo. You're laughing. There's all sorts of these meetings with Donald Trump and President Cyril Ramaphosa. But is this time for South Africa to put its hand up and say, you know what, we're not actually going to take any nonsense?
Yeah. Look, the reality is, and I'm talking from an economical perspective, I mean, America is 30% of global GDP. I mean, it's a GDP of 30 trillion, Africa is 3 trillion. So from economical perspective, we don't have that much clout. But having said that, when you look at the growth stats for Africa, when you look at the endowments of Africa, albeit that globally we've got Trump 2.0 and the challenges and the changing landscape that is there, I think it's shaken the world to the point that here's an opportunity to reset our minds and say, guys, with all this change that is happening, with all this drama that is happening, it allows us as Africa to stand up, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, and says there's an opportunity to reset our minds and position ourselves in a different way. And it's a combination of being politically tactful, but at the same time being economically savvy. And I think that's what we have. So with President Ramaphosa going to the US, yes, there are complications because the US said they're not coming to G20. But for me, I think it's again an opportunity to say to ourselves, there's opportunity in the world, how can we position ourselves? And it's going to require a lot of political smartness, but at the same time being a capitalist from an economic perspective and saying, okay, America has made its stance, and they're justified in making that stance because they're an independent country. But from a South Africa perspective, it also says to us as an African continent, what are the opportunities for us and how do we navigate that? And for me, I see opportunities more as, rather than risk with regards to all these dynamics. And I know I'm saying a lot, but I'm excited. It's a hard season we're going into, but at the end of the day, I see light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a freight train that's coming our way.
John, is it all about negotiation, like Rutendo said? Is it all about negotiation? Going high, meet in the middle somewhere?
Is that how negotiation is these days, Ray?
It does in the United States.
I'm watching on the global stage, the negotiation playbook has suddenly seemed to have changed quite dramatically. I don't think we're going into trying to meet the middle ground now. We're going in with extreme statements, changes in policy, volatility. I think distracting the global opinion from other policies that are being set up in a number of countries, and a move towards a very different type of government and governance around the world. I think we've got to negotiate. Of course we have to do. We have to think what negotiation means. It's not always about being the conciliatory middleman. You've got to have a statement. What do we stand for in South Africa? If you look at the V20, which is a values 20, they've got these different streams, and I've talked to Monde Lovu from the Black Management Forum, who's driving one of those, and Bonang Mahali. They're doing really powerful work, making powerful statements about Africa's identity. We need to have that sense and not to be waiting for handouts. We have at Henley Business School people graduating all the time coming from nothing, and they cross the stage. You've got a quarter of graduates, 3/4 of the family, applauding for what they've done through generations to get these smart people into the mainstream. That's what we have to accelerate and multiply, not just in South Africa, but through the G20 into Africa. We need to be very assertive about values, about what we stand for, and the principles of Ubuntu. While people may not like the word, they can take those principles in their own words and apply them through the G20 in the way we govern. Now, we have to stand up for something. We can't just sit back and wait for people to help us. We are robust, and we're going to make it work.
Oh, I really hope so. Jon Foster-Pedley, Dean of the Henley Business School, and Rutendo Hwindingwi, thank you so much from Africa Tribe. Good to have you both with us. I could speak about Ubuntu all day long, but unfortunately we are bound by our time. Thank you to both of you. Well, that wraps up our time together. Keep following us on our social media as we bring you the latest G20 news. South Africa is facing a few headwinds when it comes to building our local economy. The latest unemployment figures show that more jobs have been lost, so the challenge remains to counter this. Until next time.